you know what surprises me that a lot of people just don't have common knowledge on? And it could just be because the public education system failed us and only told us what they wanted us to believe. Did you know that John D. Rockefeller is the reason we have Big Pharma nowadays? He played a significant role in transforming the American medical system from natural-based medicine to oil-based medicine. Like, for instance, he used oil in his oil wealth and influence to restructure the medical education system. Like, so his money funded, which is why you see a lot of halls, like college dorms and halls and buildings, Rockefeller, his name, donated to him because he funded his form of education, propaganda, into college classrooms. So that way they would teach. He literally funded the Flexner report in 1910. So yeah, he which advocated for standardized and science-based medical curricula that resulted in closure of many schools teaching herbal and alternative medicines. So another person who is part of the reason that mainstream society is so disconnected from actual sciences and natural-based medicines and natural remedies and the earth itself. A freaking oil tycoon. So he also established the Rockefeller Institute of Medicine Research, now known as the Rockefeller University, which advanced biomedical research and prioritized pharmaceutical treatments over natural remedies, which in some ways a lot of medical historians will praise him for that. But we also need to discuss how he erased certain, because he was funding the curriculum, when it came to the origins of medicine, he would erase certain curricula to fund his propaganda and replace it with propaganda, kind of like King James did with the Bible. So prior to his nonsense and his interventions, America's medicine was basically wildly based on natural remedies, herbal medicines, holistic medicines, like ancient wisdoms that not only the native people taught us, that we brought with us as like colonizers. When we came over here, we had a lot of ancient medicines that we did have a knowledge of, and that you can trace that archaeologically through the Silk Road and through the early peoples up in the steppe system in Europe, and then also in Mesopotamia as well, and also in Eurasia, where archaeology can prove that with like pot. Anyway, yeah, mainstream archaeology can prove it through like apothecary tools and early inventions of the mortar and pestle, and be able to date what's inside those vessels, which is really cool. So but John D. Rockefeller and his ties to other historically not cool families, including the fathers of like antiseptic, so erasing history was his game. That was what he was into. But his investments and policy influence promoted chemical-based drugs, many of which were derived from petrochemicals. So oil, literally oil. We're talking about the people that thought like bloodletting was cool. Like you just here, pour out a bunch of blood, you'll feel better later. Like, oh no, but because he had the money to back it up, he paid for these programs to change the way that the literature was written to teach medicine, which is why you see such a huge disconnect and like a rediscoverance of ancient medicines and how they actually work in context to helping the body. Why foraging is coming back into like practice and why it's so important. And if you want a good movie to give you a concept of what it looks like to make your own medicine and why it's important, I suggest you look up Awakenings with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro. That's a good movie. It also gives you a view as a human into what it was like to be somebody with disability stuck in an institution, how doctors who were trying to use natural remedies to fix certain symptoms and signs and whatever in different patients, how they had to fight for funding, and how a lot of our friends and folks and ancestors would show up to these big wig meetings and basically kind of be on like like an animal in a zoo to try to get funding. Like if they could advocate for themselves, they would talk about why the medicine was important, why they needed the funding. Had they not been able to advocate for themselves, they were taken out there in like a show pony way. I don't even get me started on the atrocities of the big medicine system because, girl, I could talk to you for days. But back to Rockefeller. The main reason that it's a really big issue is that it's a lasting impact. It's a lasting legacy. So you got dormitories, halls, funding programs, universities named after a guy who changed medicine in a bad way. Like, sure, some of the inventions that came afterwards were awesome and they were great. But the intention behind why he did it was so god-awful, and the people that it affected afterwards, the numbers, like the numbers of people it infected are, like the repercussions of that kind of business dealing they're still here today. That's why you see a lot of hospitals get away with malpractice, and why certain laws are written the way that they are, so that way they are less likely to be implicated in crimes. essentially. It's also why we saw a lot of institutions that held our disabled folks or our folks on the spectrum, why we saw them be experimented on. It's why we saw the big movement in the 70s, especially when we saw the ratification of the institutions, even though they technically really didn't do anything. It was all kind of like, again, a show pony situation. Like, sure, we'll change the way we treat people. JK, we're going to do it in a different way. So as much as they were definitely under the knife for the way that they would restrain people with chemical restraints and physical restraints, the way they abused them, the way they wouldn't let them, they wouldn't feed them, the defunding of these institutions, the shackling them in rooms together and letting them basically die together. Like that, you can trace all of that all the way back to Rockefeller. And then farther back to you really can. Don't get me even started on forced sterilization, because that's a whole nother sicko pipeline that they didn't have to do what they did to BIPOC women or indigenous women at all, but they still did. They still experimented on women of color. And then again, on people with disabilities and autistic people. Like there's a history in the United States specifically on the atrocities that they have done to people of color, BIPOC people, and people with disabilities. Big medicine is not what you think it is, and you can trace its origins. You can. I suggest you start to learn what your local natural fauna is, because it's actually pretty cool. It's pretty cool. What you can find in the wild. Like, I need you to understand that Rockefeller's influence from America went so far as to influence China. The culture that has ancient medicine. Like, so much so that it stripped Africa of its natural identity with medicine. I'm being so serious. Before Rockefeller, we used to use copper because of copper's natural ability to be bacteria killer. That's why we saw a lot of copper reharvesting and reuse at the same time as Rockefeller and the industrialization of America and Western ideals being forced and assimilated onto other cultures. Yeah, Carnegie had a bit to do with that too, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, Rockefeller, because of his influence and his money, he funded programs to change educational curriculum, so much so that his petroleum-based medicine went against what we already knew. And when we started to resurface and review what we already knew as medicine, as the basis of medicine, there was arguments within the scientific community over antiseptic practices. I wish I was joking, because there was such a huge brainwashing system in place because of billionaires and big pharma and big oil tycoons and those families that came over here just to colonize and get what they want and have their influence on the rest of the world. Yeah, because of them. They argued amongst themselves because they were so disconnected from their culture, and so much of their identities were erased for them. Yeah, look up the history of John Hopkins, the university in Baltimore, and where their funding came from and why they became so prestigious in the medicine world. Just some knowledge.